Resuming debate, may please to débat the honourable member for Hamilton East Stony Creek.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I'll be sharing my time today with the member from Nickel Belt, and I have never seen such a demonstration of ice skating in my life as I just saw. But Mr. Speaker, normally I like to talk as free and easy in my speeches and as relaxed as I can. But because of the nature of this debate and the impact on my community, I've written my remarks down today to kind of as I have a significant amount of frustration and anger about what has occurred there. So I'm rising to speak on the New Democrats' Opposition Day motion, and as we debate and consider the situations facing Canadian companies and Canadian workers who either have been or are subject to foreign takeovers. Over the last 25 years since Conservative Prime Minister Brian Mulroney declared that Canada was open for business, thousands of companies have changed hands and tens of thousands of workers have lost their jobs. In my hometown of Hamilton, we have seen these takeovers, and we've seen the results of them where so many of my friends have lost their jobs, and in many cases, you might say they lost their futures as well, Mr. Speaker. Since the inception of the Investment Canada Act in 1985, there have been 17,485 foreign investments under review. And according to Industry Canada, of those, 13,516 have been takeovers. And under the ICA, the Harper government has turned down only one takeover prior to this one, and that was McDonald Detweiler. This happened after considerable pressure led by an NDP MP, Peggy Nash from Toronto. And Mr. Speaker, you will have heard that during the 13-year term of successive Liberal governments, not one single takeover was blocked. In 2009, again, according to Industry Canada, the government reviewed only 22 of 338 takeovers. Now, the United States accounts for over 60% of all takeovers in Canada since 1985 and continues to account for about half today, well ahead of the EU, which is at 27%. In 2007, foreign-controlled firms accounted for 21.3% of Canadian corporate assets, 29.4% of total revenues, and 26.2% of operating profits. Now, Mr. Speaker, for the first time since 1999, in the year 2000, foreign-controlled companies operating in Canada held more than half, 52.8% of manufacturing assets, up from 46.8% in the previous year. Statistics Canada says that the increase is due largely to foreign acquisitions of Canadian-controlled firms, especially, Mr. Speaker, in primary metals, wood, and paper industries. So today, as we talk about a net benefit to Canada, do we mean a net benefit for Canadian workers or Canadian investors and corporate boards? Last evening, Mr. Speaker, on the CBC National News, the network compared two takeovers in Hamilton, Dofasco by ArcelorMittal and Stelco by U.S. Steel. Clearly, these are two players in the manufacture of steel products that function with very different business models. And Mr. Speaker, I remember well the enthusiasm in Hamilton when U.S. Steel came into the chase to purchase Stelco. The newfound hope that pensioners had that their pensions would be secured by promises made by U.S. Steel. And the workers in the plant, Mr. Speaker, who felt at least tentatively that they could begin to plan their futures for them and their families. Today, as collective bargaining has stalled and many employees at the Hamilton plant wonder how could it have even been called collective bargaining at all. Demands from the company are clearly designed to destroy their defined benefit pension plan and take away new employees' ability to count on a dignified retirement in the future. And that's the single major issue in this dispute. The former Stelco, now U.S. Steel workers, clearly remember the situation their brothers and sisters at U.S. Steel's Nanticoke plant faced, with many months on a picket line trying to defend their pensions, and Hamilton workers now have to question what lies ahead for them. The United Steelworkers Local 1005 have labeled the situation of U.S. Steel as nation-wrecking. They've done so because they have seen what happened to labor relations with Vale's purchase of Inco, when Xstrata laid off hundreds of workers and Rio Tinto closed operations in Quebec. These companies came to Canada making promises to workers and their families, making promises to this federal government that they would maintain operations and employment. Our federal government said the propositions put forward by these companies would be a net benefit for Canada. Well, Mr. Speaker, at these plants, they are still waiting for this supposed net benefit. Older workers at all of these plants and at U.S. Steel in Hamilton wonder, Mr. Speaker, just how bad can it get? Are we actually in a race to the bottom? Today, U.S. steel workers, United States steel workers, face what in collective bargaining is commonly called whipsawing. Normally, Mr. Speaker, whipsawing happens when one plant in Canada who has a relationship with a company is played off against another company another unit in the same company during their collective bargaining process. But the difference here, Mr. Speaker, today in the whipsawing of these workers at U.S. Steel is that they're being whipsawed against plants in the United States under the ownership of the same American employer. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'd ask you, isn't it simply logical to expect that an American company would protect their own citizens ahead of Canadian workers? In Hamilton's situation, U.S. Steel has closed down the last operating blast furnace and indicated they will lock out their employees shortly unless workers accept a decimation of their defined benefit pension plan. So, Mr. Speaker, where's the net benefit for these Hamilton workers? How is Canada a better country because we allowed Xstrata, Rio Tinto, Vale, and U.S. Steel to bring their anti-worker labor relations to Canada? So I would say, Mr. Speaker, I would suggest nation-wrecking does apply. Today, workers aren't being asked to give up their own defined benefit pension plan. They're being asked to give up the possibility for future generations to retire in security. These Hamilton workers are being coerced into committing a major disservice to their own families' future generations. Mr. Speaker, Canada has been built on value-added manufacturing that turned our resources into the products needed around the world. So Canadians must ask themselves, how is it that we've reached this point where corporate demands that before would be considered out of the question are now quickly becoming the norm? How is it possible we're now faced with importing corporate control of not only our companies, but potentially foreign corporate control of our resources? Mr. Speaker, the reason is clear. This has happened as a result of successive governments in this place making terrible decisions in allowing foreign investment deals and company takeovers that clearly have failed to meet the test of a net benefit to Canadian workers. So if you hear my voice tremble slightly today, Mr. Speaker, it's because I'm angry, I'm hurting. I agree with the United Steelworkers Local 1005 that nation-wrecking is being allowed to take place across Canada. And I will close, Mr. Speaker, with a couple of questions. What will this government do to reverse the devastating calamity for Canadian workers? Will this government take into account the status of existing collective agreements reached between workers and companies over many years, and apply that as an aspect of net benefit to Canada to this part of any foreign ownership deal? What limits is the government prepared to put on foreign corporations' ability to roll back collective agreements using whipsawing between Canada and non-Canadian companies? So, Mr. Speaker, when we talk net benefit to Canadians, we must include net benefit to the plant workers at the same time. So I conclude my remarks with that, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Member for Burlington.